Do complex legal issues hold you back? Let's get energized and bring clarity to your top legal questions. This is Law Talk with the Flock by Goosmann Law Firm.
Hello, I'm your host, Jeana Goosmann, a CEO, lawyer, author, and woman business owner, here to help navigate you through the law and your life as a leader. For today's episode, I have with me an experienced trial attorney and senior counsel at the Goosmann Law Firm, Steven Henricks. Steven, welcome to the podcast, and we're going to talk a little bit about reptile theory.
Thank you, Jeana. I'm looking forward to it.
Steven, just before we begin, can you introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners?
Yeah, so I am a 2-month veteran of the Goosmann Law Firm. And speaking of being a veteran, before I joined the law firm, I served over 30 years on active duty in the Army as a judge advocate. In that role, I served as general counsel at 2 of our premier warfighting posts at Fort Drum, New York, and at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington. I also served as one of 3 prosecutors, prosecuting Major Nadel Hassan. And for the last 6 years, I've been a military judge.
Awesome. So as a military judge, you have seen hundreds of trials.
I have, both as a judge and also as a prosecutor. And before that, I was also a defense counsel and chief prosecutor at the 1st Cavalry Division in the 101st Airborne. So taking into account all those trials and then the courtroom experience as a trial judge, I surely have seen over 1,000 trials.
And can you explain what it is that you do at the Goosmann Law Firm?
So I'm a senior litigator here, and I basically help business leaders win their disputes so they can spend their time on what's worth it.
Fantastic. And I'm excited to talk with you about reptile theory because it's been a hot topic among trial attorneys for about a decade now. And I think that it's still intriguing to folks. And when they hear about it, they wonder, what in the heck are we talking about? We got lizards in the courtroom. What is that? So at a very basic level, let's explain, what is reptile theory?
So it starts off as a theory outside the courtroom, and then it's being applied inside the courtroom. So outside the courtroom, there's this idea that evolution has occurred for us as humans, and we started off with a reptile brain, and that reptile brain still remains inside of us, and it responds to certain things. So that's been floating around in evolutionary circles and scientific circles for some time. But in the last 10 or 15 years, it's also been applied to the courtroom. And so that's the basic theory of how we've got it, that in the courtroom, it's primarily a tool used by plaintiffs' attorneys. However, it also has a role to be used by defense counsel defending businesses as well. And it focuses not on your client, but it focuses on outrages done by the other side that will, at least in theory, apply to the reptile brain that we each have.
And the reptile brain at its base is fight or flight.
It's that, and it's also what is a threat to the community. That's going to apply or appeal to the reptile brain, and the reptile brain will then decide what the appropriate remedy for that is, fight or flight. And then in the courtroom, hopefully it turns into a verdict in your client's favor.
Absolutely. So in the core, it's really a methodology that trial lawyers can use to try and increase the verdict for their client if they're on the plaintiff side, or and then if you're on the defense side, certainly you're trying to prevent that from happening. So we have these different techniques, and you're really speaking to the jury. And I think it's important to talk about that for a minute, because so often as litigators, people call themselves litigators and they forget about the trial, right? At the end of the day, all this litigation is leading up to the actual trial. And so all the discovery fights and the e-discovery and what are the search terms and all the mini motions along the way are really leading up to that trial. And the trial is what really matters. And I think it's important that trial lawyers think about, what are we going to do? How are we going to present the case? What's the most effective way to present the case? And that's where the study of this really has come in.
That's correct, Jeana. And if you're going to use the reptile theory, or really any theory as you approach the trying of your case, By the time you get in front of a jury and you're trying to come up with a theory, it's probably too late. The best time to start implementing these theories is in the pretrial discovery. Any motions to the court, that won't apply to every motion, but some motions will have a role in. And then, of course, when you're selecting a jury in the voir dire process, each one of those steps you'll be thinking about and using at the appropriate time, the reptile theory.
Absolutely. So you really want to have this in your packet before you begin building your case, before you start asking interrogatories or taking depositions. It's something that you're building upon as you're working towards the day in the court.
Absolutely. And again, as I mentioned, if you start using the reptile theory only in the courtroom, it's too late. You needed to have built your case up to that point. Especially with your selection of jurors, you want to make sure, to the extent that you can, you're selecting jurors that are going to view this approach favorably.
And let's talk a little bit more about some of the meat of the approach. So what are some of the ways that we can tap into the reptile brain?
So again, the reptile brain isn't about sympathy for your client. It's about outrages the other side has done. And if they threaten safety, that is going to then trigger the reptile brain to say, we need to do something about this.
And what kind of, let's talk about some examples. I mean, we can even just brainstorm, and I know we've had some in the past, but as far as things that we'd be looking for in the future. And I think that anytime, for example, there's a habit of not having potential risk management protocols in place that would allow something to happen, that could be potentially go towards the reptile brain, because if there aren't proper safety protocols, then this could happen again, and this could happen over and over. That comes to mind to me. What other examples can you think of, Steve?
Well, specifically on the risk management, companies have to sit down and make decisions. But when they're making decisions about what type of safety protocols you're going to put in place, one of the things we would advise to our clients is to do a check about how the community would view that. And if we're defending someone, a business, for example, and they're concerned about the reptile theory being utilized against them, there's a multi-pronged approach that we can use to defeat that. However, clues that it's being used against you is going to be not focusing on how the community would be viewing your actions. And so let's take back to the risk management example. If the community is going to look at this and say, you know what, you didn't put safety first. Safety was your second or third level concern here. You need to check. That's your check against the community. And the community is going to look at that and say, no, you need to put safety first. And so that's always the check that we recommend that businesses look at when coming up with their risk management approach.
Versus profits first, right? Obviously, if there's damning memos or emails that they have out there that talk about what's going to be best when we launch this for profitability, and there's no talk about safety, that's certainly something that a talented plaintiff's lawyer is going to look to exploit.
That's absolutely correct.
What other things come to mind as we talk about reptile theory? To me, one of the other pieces I think of when it comes to this is the psychodrama approach. So that also has to do with, people are expecting a performance in the courtroom. They want to be entertained to some extent and to really have an emotional connection to the case. And tying in the emotional connection to the case and to the facts through the story that you tell, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's well accepted trial strategy. And of course, as a judge, I've seen this many, many times. It's not so much the facts that are being played out in the courtroom. It's the emotion that attaches to those facts. And if you can get that emotional, and then there's that emotional attachment to the jury. And there's another common trial strategy of show, don't tell. So if you're deploying that to the jury, you're leading them to water, but you're not telling them how to drink. They will figure it out on their own. And they will also then figure out that the reptile brain will at some point kick in under this theory and recognize this threat to the community. And then the jury will want to do something about it, both because of the emotional attachment and because the reptile brain has kicked in because of your presentation.
Now, we couldn't have this conversation and not talk a little bit about golden rule. So there's also the concept of golden rule, and you can't say essentially put yourself in their shoes. So how does this interplay with a golden rule conversation?
Well, first off, you have to do a little bit of research in each jurisdiction to understand how that golden rule applies. Because each jurisdiction, state at the federal level, will have a slightly different rule on that. However, you can always talk about not just the harm to your client if you're representing the plaintiff, but also the worst case scenario harm that could have happened because of the safety violation. When you talk about that, and that approach will usually be admissible, even taking into account the golden rule prohibitions. When you take that into account, that's how you can then trigger the reptile brain, but stay into accordance with the local rules.
Very good. Well, this has been an exciting conversation to think about some of the different trial theories and the ways that we approach different cases. And I appreciate the discussion today here, Steven.
Thank you, Jen. It's been a great time. I appreciate it.
Have a great day, everyone. Go make it worth it.
Thanks for joining us for Law Talk with the Flock by Goosmann Law Firm. We hope you feel energized and ready to soar past your goals. Become a Flock fan and subscribe to our podcast for weekly episodes. Learn more at goosmannlaw.com.